the oldest texts in the world hold a secret that modern Bibles never dare to mention. There are manuscripts from the Judean desert that describe what happened before the flood in astonishing detail. They do not describe the flood as a climatic event, but rather as the end of an invisible war that lasted for decades. A war that official history silenced and that most people have never heard mentioned. And at the center of that silenced war exists a figure that is not named in Genesis. A figure whose presence, however, changes everything if one knows where to look in the forbidden texts. What would happen if I told you that the Ark of Noah was never unprotected for even a single moment? Ever? What if the story you learned in childhood was the simplified version of something darker? The apocryphal texts, the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees, describe a terrifying reality. While Noah was nailing beams under an indifferent sky, beings of supernatural stature watched him. They did not watch him with curiosity, but with hunger, calculating the exact moment to destroy everything. And yet the Ark survived decades of construction in the open field, surrounded by monsters. How is it possible that none of those beings approached to burn her and eliminate the last hope? The answer is not in Noah's strength, nor in the naivety of the Nephilim, nor in mere luck. The answer lies in what was placed between the Ark and the darkness, something that no one dared to cross. This is the tale of the war that occurred between each hammer blow of Noah, the one that no one taught you. The Nephilim, children of the fallen watchers from heaven, ruled the earth with total brutality. They had crushed entire cities and subdued kingdoms with the violence of their colossal bodies. And yet, for decades, they allowed an old man to build an ark before their very eyes. At first, they let it grow because they mocked the old man who spoke of water falling from the sky. But as the ark took shape, something dark and instinctive awakened in their corrupted blood. They could feel it in the air, a change that their ancestral instincts recognized as the mark of judgment. The structure that once seemed absurd to them was beginning to appear as a real threat to their dominance. And then they decided it was time to descend into the valley and reduce that last hope to ashes. The earth trembled beneath their steps as they descended en masse from the hills on the moonless night. Their colossal bodies blocked the sky, turning the enormous ark into something suddenly fragile. They moved forward with the confidence of beings who had never encountered an obstacle they could not overcome. But upon reaching the edge of the clearing where the ark rested, something stopped them abruptly, without warning. There was a figure standing before the vessel, completely motionless, projecting an absolute calm. It did not shine softly or comfortingly, but with a light that demanded distance instead of closeness. It was the kind of glow carved from the same substance as a lightning bolt before it touched the dark ground. His feet were planted with a solidity that suggested the ground itself acknowledged his authority. He was not wielding a sword high, he was not shouting threats at the forest, he was not moving nervously from side to side. She was simply there, and that stillness was infinitely more terrifying than any forged weapon. Because stillness means certainty, and certainty reveals that one knows exactly why they were sent. The Nephilim stopped, and in that instant, something happened that they had not experienced in hundreds of years. They felt recognition, not from a friend, but from something much older than themselves, before which they had trembled. In the deepest fragments of what they once were, before the corruption, they remembered that light. They remembered what it meant to stand before an authority measured not in muscle, but in the will of God. One of them nervously shifted his enormous weight, suddenly feeling uncertain of his power. Another exhaled slowly, his nostrils flared by confusion and a panic he did not dare to name. The largest of the group took a slow and deliberate step that made the dry ground crackle beneath his heel. The angel did not retreat a millimeter, but the air between them compressed brutally and instantly. It was as if invisible hands had stretched the entire atmosphere of the valley to the point of total rupture. The ancestral trees began to softly groan under that supernatural pressure accumulated in the air. Then a single flash sculpted a burning line in the ground between the angel and the monsters. There were no theatrical flames reaching the sky, nor deafening thunder that broke the silence of the night. Only a deep and irrefutable border engraved in the very crust of the earth with celestial fire. A message from the throne of God, perfectly legible to the darkness without the need to use words. You will come this far, and not a step further will you cross while I remain before this vessel. The Nephilim froze its step with its foot, suspended while the orange glow reflected in its eyes. For the first time that night, something appeared in his heart that he hadn't felt in ages. It was not the fear of death that stopped him, but the weight of an authority he could not defeat. Behind the motionless angel, the ark remained in absolute silence, deeply preserved and protected. Not by walls of stone, not by human armies, but by an unbreakable sovereign decree from heaven. A decree that stated that that family and that vessel would survive the impending apocalypse. The wind slowly returned to the valley, brushing the clearing as if the earth released its held breath. The Nephilim wanted to advance, they wanted to destroy, but their bodies did not obey their rebellious spirits. Instead, they began to slowly retreat, grinding their teeth with a fury that had no possible escape. Even the purest rebellion understands when it is up against a force that cannot be defeated with violence. And the angel did not move a muscle, but remained where the Father had placed him from the very beginning, standing as the ultimate barrier between dark corruption and God's holy covenant with humanity, between blind violence and the preservation of the last seed that could regenerate the shattered world, between total and irreversible extinction and the beautiful promise of a rainbow that no one had yet seen. Invisible to the sleeping world, undocumented in any annals that men would write later, but absolutely essential and absolutely decisive for every generation that would exist after the flood. As the days and weeks went by, the guardian angel never left its post for even a fleeting moment. He did not walk nervously like a mortal man consumed by the anxiety of what might emerge. He was not looking for a place to rest his feet, nor was he distracted by the changing shadows of the natural world. Sometimes he remained next to the imposing bow of the ark, and sometimes next to the enormous door of salvation. Sometimes he walked slowly along its colossal expanse, inspecting the boundaries of the divine pact, always completely present, unmovable, aware of every spiritual movement in the dark valley. Inside the fragile tents, the patriarch Noah felt it in his spirit without being able to see it with his eyes. There were cold nights when the faithful builder would wake up startled, his chest suddenly agitated. He went outside, looked at the dark forest, and felt it was denser and more threatening than usual. Then he would bow his head, close his tired eyes, and whisper an urgent prayer to the Creator. And, miraculously, in an inexplicable way for any rational mind, a supernatural peace was returning. But that temporary peace was often the deceptive calm before the demonic pride attacked. Because among the Nephilim, there was one who could never forget the humiliation of that burning line. He was vastly older than the others, broad-shouldered, marked by centuries of merciless war. His deep voice carried absolute weight among his corrupted peers. He was the one who set the dark course. He had seen incredibly strong human cities crumble into dust under the crushing dominance of their species. He had demolished stone structures infinitely more resilient than that ridiculous, flimsy vessel. And in all its centuries of dark dominion, it had never been denied in a territory it desired. However, something about that silent figure before the Ark ignited in him an unquenchable, obsessive rage. It was not submission that she felt, but a burning challenge to her own supremacy that she could not ignore. He began to observe the solitary celestial guardian, distancing himself from the rest of his pack to study it. He watched it from the elevated ridges overlooking the calm clearing below, for hours on end. He studied it with the calculated coldness with which hungry predators study a difficult prey. He was looking for any sign of physical weakness, any movement pattern, the slightest flaw in their being. But the angel showed no distraction, no physical fatigue, no wandering focus. That impenetrable perfection infuriated the scarred Nephilim more than any blow in centuries of combat. Dark corruption thrives, provoking chaotic reactions, and the angel simply did not react. Then a night arrived that was vastly darker and more oppressive than any of the previous ones in the valley. The sky was completely sealed under an impenetrable cover of black clouds as dense as dark stone. The stars disappeared without a trace, and the moon cowardly hid behind a thick veil. The very oxygen in the air felt heavy and hard to breathe, as if creation was holding something back. It was the kind of night that pure rebellion prefers, with no celestial witnesses, without light or natural visibility. The scarred giant moved silently, impossibly for his size, calculating each step with cold precision. He stopped exactly where the burning line had been etched into the ground that night of humiliation. The orange mark had disappeared, erased by the wind, but he remembered its position with precision. The angel was standing beside the Ark, its body of light facing the outer darkness. The Nephilim deliberately crossed the invisible memory of that holy border, anticipating a violent reaction. But absolutely nothing happened. No flash of celestial light, no burn of divine fire. For a deceptive fraction of a second, a look of arrogant triumph flickered across his scarred face. He foolishly believed that the angel's power had finally diminished, that it had become vulnerable to attack. God took another heavy step, getting significantly closer to his final goal, the vulnerable wooden ark. The vessel dominated his view directly behind the angel, massive yet tragically fragile before him. He knew that with a single violent blow, he could splinter the entire structure into 1,000 completely useless pieces. Finally, he was close enough to see the angel with astonishing and complete clarity of detail. He saw not just a shining mass, but an armor of radiance enveloping a physically defined shape. The angel's eyes did not shine with rage, but with the perfectly serene wisdom of the eternal God. The angel knew that the giant had crossed the sacred border and yet did not move an inch. That unperturbed silence was for the colossal ego of the monster, exactly like a personal insult. The monster extended its huge, scarred hand, not to strike yet, but to test the pace. His hand reached out towards the wooden beams of the ark, and that was the exact moment when everything changed. The angel finally moved, without dramatic turns, raised weapons, or any deafening war cries. In that single fluid movement, The entire physical and spiritual atmosphere of the glade transformed instantly. The wind exploded from the center of the angel's being as if pushed by an invisible and immense force. The trees bent completely away as the dry dust rose in chaotic spirals. The outstretched hand of the Nephilim froze in the air, paralyzed because the light was no longer contained. It expanded outward, not blinding the monster's eyes, but crushing its senses completely. It was not a chaotic explosion, but a surgical application of force that pressed down like pure gravity. It reminded the Nephilim of the unchanging truth of its own insignificance before the hierarchy of the universe. The giant tried to push his body forward with all his muscles tensed to their absolute limit, his clenched teeth, the ground creaking beneath his feet, pressing against the crushing celestial pressure. For the first time in centuries of undisputed dominance, he encountered a resistance that he simply could not overcome. The voice of the angel finally spoke, not shouted in fury, nor pleaded, but stratified in eternal layers. It sounded as if vastly more than one powerful tone coexisted within the very sound of those words. "You will not touch this," said the voice, and those words were neither a warning nor a plea of any known kind. It was an eternal and unbreakable decree emanating from the throne of the Almighty God, who created all that exists. The giant roared with bitter fury and launched its arm with lethal force directly at the wooden ark. But he never got to touch her at the exact moment he raised his arm. The divine restraint of the angel ended. The holy light then collided with the corrupted flesh with a power that no muscle could withstand. It was not a burning fire, it was not a clash of lightning, but something infinitely heavier than both. It was supreme divine authority made literally physical, and the giant flew violently through the clearing, not completely destroyed, because the time of the final judgment had not yet reached its exact moment. He was thrown like a dry tree, uprooted effortlessly by a hurricane that showed no mercy. He crashed headfirst at the edge of the forest, snapping ancient trunks under his uncontrolled weight. A paralyzed and deep silence immediately followed in the dark woods surrounding the clearing. The other Nephilim did not advance to help their fallen leader, nor did they dare to challenge the Guardian. They had seen enough of the power of heaven to know they would be annihilated before taking 3 steps. The humiliated giant slowly rose from the splintered logs, something vital broken within him. It was not a broken bone or a torn muscle, but his absolute certainty, his conviction of being invincible. When he looked back at the angel, he understood something that chilled him from within with total terrifying clarity. The Guardian had not fought at his full strength. That was merely God's merciful restraint. If that crushing defeat was the restraint, what would the full judgment be like when the definitive moment arrived? Slowly, deeply broken in his pride, the giant retreated into the forest without breaking his gaze. And the angel returned to its peaceful stillness, exactly as if nothing significant had happened moments before. The ark remained intact, perfectly preserved, exactly as God had commanded from the beginning. In the following weeks, the Nephilim did not return to the valley. The forest remained distant and subdued in silence. They had finally understood, in the depths of their corrupted spirits, the power of the eternal God. But while that fragile peace reigned in the valley, something vastly greater was gathering on the dark horizon. The atmosphere changed first, long before a single drop of destructive rain touched the dry ground. The air became impossibly heavy and suffocating, as if creation was bracing for impact. The great door of the ark then closed with a sound that reverberated like the seal of an entire era. It was not Noah who closed it. According to the apocryphal texts, it was sealed by a force beyond the human. And when that massive door closed, something changed in the posture of the angel that had remained motionless. His mission of passive protection had culminated, and now something radically different and more grandiose was beginning. The first thunder shook the foundations of the earth with a violence that no living being had ever experienced. The sky tore from horizon to horizon, and the water fell not like rain, but like spilled oceans. The sources of the deep abyss broke from below, turning the land into total apocalyptic chaos. The Nephilim roared with a blind panic that no one had ever seen them show during all their years of reign. Some ran towards the highest hills in a futile attempt to escape a God who reaches everything. Others tried to resist the flood with their colossal bodies, as if strength could halt the judgment. And some looked with hatred at the sealed ark, that silent symbol of divine defiance against them. In a state of dark desperation, they charged through the violent waters toward the ascending vessel. Not because they believed they would win, but because demonic pride refuses to drown in silence and resignation. And there, standing firm before the ark that rose from the flooded land, the unmovable guardian angel remained. The torrential rain pounded his armor and splashed to the sides as lightning cracked behind him. The dark waters rose around his armored feet as the Nephilim reached the flood. The most arrogant of them roared with absolute desperation and lunged with outstretched hands towards the wood. But the furious current brutally collided with his body just as the ark began to float free. The angel completely released its divine restraint, not in emotional fury, but in cold, sovereign finality. The sacred light expanded from her being violently, not burning flesh, but crushing with pure authority. The giant was pushed back as if an invisible mountain of solid rock had struck him head-on. And the ark rose gently and miraculously, while the corrupted ground disappeared beneath the waves of judgment. The angel did not chase the fleeing Nephilim, nor drag them into the dark and suffocating depths. That was not his assigned role. The final judgment belonged entirely to the waters of the abyss unleashed by God. Her mission was singular and deeply protective, to ensure that the ark survived the earthly transition. And he executed it with a perfection that no human text could describe with its limited words and images. The vessel detached from the gravity of the ruined earth, floating divinely over the apocalypse. As the agonizing roars of the corrupted Nephilim faded beneath the deafening thunder of the sky, the ancestral mountains disappeared beneath the tides. The forests were swallowed by the dark depths. The wicked cities of men were erased as if they had never been built on this earth, and the pure violence of the ancient world was permanently silenced, not by the edge of any sword, but by a total divine cleansing that left the earth in silence so that life could begin anew. As the ark drifted away towards the watery horizon, the angel positioned himself on the last visible rock. He silently observed the vessel for 40 days, faithful to his mission until the water calmed. When the waters receded and the ark rested on new ground, its assignment would finally be complete. He looked one last time at the small vessel in the vast distance, towards the sacred pact in its walls. And he also looked towards the fragile and beautiful hope of humanity preserved within those wooden walls. And then her bright light slowly dimmed, not extinguished or defeated, but obediently withdrawn. Her protective presence rose from the ruined earth, like the morning mist that fades at dawn. remaining forever without a specific name in the scriptures, without praise from the mortals who slept, but being absolutely essential and decisive for the survival of every human being that exists today. Because the Ark of the Covenant was never unprotected, not even during the exhausting decades of construction, not even during the fierce trials of the enemy lurking in the shadows with rage accumulated over entire centuries. And she certainly was not unprotected during the catastrophic violence of the storm that redefined history. And perhaps that is the spiritual lesson that this story was always meant to teach us from the beginning. When the Almighty God begins a righteous work in your life, He guards it with a ferocity that no one can break. When God establishes a covenant with your family, He protects it with all the weight and authority of the entire heaven. And when the corrupted world rises in anger against what God has chosen to bless, He does not remain silent. He descends and draws a burning and unbreakable line in the ground, invisible to the eyes, but absolutely real. There is a deeply personal question that this story leaves open in the heart of those who hear it. What if the invisible spiritual battles you never saw were the exact reason for your survival? What if a nameless guardian standing firm between you and total destruction is the reason you are still here? The angel who guarded the ark was never the protagonist, but without his silent obedience, no one would be here today. There would be no rainbow in the sky. There would be no new beginning. There would be no promise of the future, only water and eternal silence. If these hidden mysteries awaken something in your spirit, subscribe to keep discovering what history forgot.